Great to see all those prize winners. I'm John Cox, University Librarian at NUIG Galway, and I'm delighted to have been asked to chair this panel discussion on disruptive changes transforming to meet new opportunities. And nice to be asked, but I had a look at last year's panel on YouTube and I realised how well it had been run and what a good finish to the conference it is. So we'll do as well as we can this year too. But Sandra Collins chaired it in an exemplary fashion. It was quite clear. Set the standard of how those things should be done. It looked like she had drilled the panel extremely well because they all spoke with a very complimentary way and they kept perfectly to time. So I thought we better meet up as a panel, which we did yesterday evening. And we had a great chat. I could realise a great range of perspectives, experience and opinions among this group. And there's a great chemistry among them. So I slept well last night knowing I feel, hope I'm not being too confident, but I think we're going to have a very good session. And really what we're going to address ultimately, or rather the way it will work, I should say, first of all, is that each of the panellists will speak, they'll introduce themselves and they'll speak for 5 minutes. And then we'll open up the discussion, of course, for your questions. That's a really vital part of the event. So I hope you've got plenty lined up or will have plenty lined up by the time everybody has spoken. And while the overall theme is disruptive changes, transforming to meet new opportunities, we've actually divided into 2 sub-themes. It's changes which are impacting or will impact libraries, and Lucy, Jim and Wendy are going to address that in their comments. And the other sub-theme is preparing staff for change and new competencies, and Leo and Vivian will take that on. But without further ado, I'd like to ask Lucy Byrnes, my colleague from NUIG Galway, our Dean of Graduate Studies, to take up the baton on current and future changes. So over to you, Lucy.
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you very much for the invitation. I said to somebody before we got started, I'm feeling a little bit like a duck out of water, and they said, well, that's your role. So I hope I can fulfill it. So just to give you a bit of background, I'm a scientist by training in the discipline of biochemistry, which is in our School of Natural Sciences in NUIG Galway. And my own research would have been on developmental biology of vertebrates. But I've been the Dean of Graduate Studies since 2012. And Graduate Studies at NUIG Galway is a relatively new function. The office itself was only established in 2008, so 10 years in existence, which is, short time in university speak anyway. And in Galway, the Graduate Studies office and the role of Dean of Graduate Studies is very much focused on research degree programmes. So PhDs, research masters, any professional doctorates, MDs and so forth. We do not deal with the postgraduate taught programs, the taught masters. So that will certainly colour my contribution. So what I'm hoping to do in the few minutes that I have is just give a little bit of context of the changes that have happened in that whole space in the last 5 to 10 years, just briefly give you the headlines on that. And then what I see coming down the track for that whole area of research degrees within universities and topics which I think would be relevant to this audience. And I really will just be headlining those, but happy to follow up on any of them later on. So just to give the context as I see it, because that's going to drive what's going to happen in the future, has been the changes in doctoral education in the last 10 years, in Europe in particular, with the final phase of the Bologna process. There was a meeting in Salzburg which came up with 10 principles for doctoral education, which were converted then into recommendations. And really, Ireland has been very much toward the forefront in adopting those principles and recommendations. So the PhD in particular hasn't changed. The core element of the PhD has not changed during that period. But the key elements of the principles that are relevant, I think, here is that the institution is now duty-bound to be more supportive to the whole education process of doctoral students. And that's evidenced in a lot of our institutions by having more committee support, regular review of the progress of the students, rather than, just letting them see, do they produce a thesis or don't they, but actually checking in with them regularly. And a really important element of structured training for our researchers. And I actually think that this is probably where a lot of my effort goes and where the partnership with university libraries is really important. So when we're training our research students, we also must pay attention, making sure that their supervisors have the relevant training as well. And then, of course, there's the group in the middle, the postdoctoral researchers that also are very hungry for training, actually. So all of that work culminated in Ireland with the publication of the National Framework for Doctoral Education in 2015, to which all the institutions signed up, and even more importantly, all the funders of research signed up, like SFI and the HRB and so forth. So I think that is kind of a summary of the doctoral education piece. The postdoctoral researchers are something that I'm paying increasingly more attention to. The European Commission published the European Charter for Researchers, which again pays more attention to the continuous professional development of researchers. Most recently, there was the Bratislava Declaration for Young Researchers. And we expect the Irish Universities Association to be coming out with the Research Careers Strategy at the end of this year. And I suppose the other thing that's also relevant context is all the good work that the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning in Higher Education has done for research students and research staff across the institutions, because research students, of course, are also teaching. So they are the students that straddle the two core functions of our universities. So what kind of training and expertise will be turning to the libraries to help us with? Information skills, as you have always been done. You're the experts in that area. That expertise is still very much in demand, and we're training new researchers all the time. But other things that I'm sure you've mentioned before would be the whole topic of open research. So I learned most of what I know about open access from librarians, but as you know, it's a much bigger issue now. How are we going to make sure that our research data is available? Our funders are demanding it. We need to know how to do it. Ye are experts in information, so we'll need to keep talking. The whole area of research integrity would be another headline that I think we have now a national policy on ensuring integrity in our research. We have a huge drive nationally to train all of our researchers in research integrity. Again, I know there's expertise in the libraries on that. Research impact would be another area that I think we need to increasingly upskill in. We need to actually improve the amount of impact that our research has. And I suppose just to finish up, there's a new development in NUI Galway where we have starting to establish a researcher development centre, which will coordinate all the types of training that we offer to researchers. And the most timely announcement that came today, just to show how important researchers are to Ireland and to our universities, has been SFI launched a call for a funding call today. They will fund 500 new PhD students over the next few years. Interestingly, the theme is not a million miles away from what your core business is. It's data and ICT skills for the future. 500 new PhD students. As everything with SFI, expressions of interest have to be in by the end of the month. So there'll be a lot of activity in your institutions around that space. And I'm sorry if I've gone over time, Catherine.
Thanks, Lucy. And on to Jim next.
Good afternoon. My name's Jim Neal. I'm from Columbia University in New York, and I'm currently the president of the American Library Association. The overarching premise of my comments this afternoon are the following. The key developments and the pressing challenges which are confronting academic research libraries are not to be resolved successfully by the individual library, but by more radical approaches to collaboration and by national systemic strategies. The financial resources, the range of expertise, and the technological infrastructures that are required mean that we need new approaches. Are you ready in Ireland to move beyond institutional boundaries and build and co-invest in new collective work? Some of you may remember Mel Brooks' film, History of the World Part 1. In one scene, Brooks is coming down the mountain as Moses. He says, "Children of Israel, I have 15," and he trips, and one of the tablets crashes to the ground. He picks himself up and says, "Children of Israel, I have 10 commandments." You wonder where those 5 commandments went. They were really instructions for the research library community of Ireland, and I have them. Commandment number 1, you will collect, organize, and preserve born digital resources. The wide range of materials, their complexity, their mutability, their fragility, all call out for collective action. Commandment 2, you will advocate for information policies and laws that advance the needs of our users. In the States, we have just created something called the Policy Corps, where we are educating 80 individuals to learn how to have deep knowledge of a particular policy area and to know how to work with the media, how to testify before Congress, how to work with our partners in that advocacy work. We're also building an advocacy network with a team of library individuals in all 435 congressional districts across the United States. So when we have an issue, we hit them at the local level, we hit them at the national level. Commandment 3, rethink scholarly communication. Rethink open content. We've had 20 years of dedicated hard work, and we're still talking about it, and we haven't made the progress we need to make. There are shifting economics, there are shifting technologies, there are shifting players, there are shifting rules and policies and laws. We need to step back and refresh our approach. And it will only happen if we are in partnership with our faculty and researcher colleagues. Libraries will not make a difference. We will only do it in collaboration with them. 4th, rethink the 21st century library information professional. Challenge your library education programs. Tell them what they are producing people for. What will the 21st century information professional need to have and need to be able to do from your perspective as colleagues and as employers? Are they building an expectation for continuing improvement, a commitment to continuing education on the part of their graduates? Are you, as library managers and supervisors, as was mentioned this morning, inculcating that set of values and expectations? And 5th, librarians of Ireland, project and create a different library future. I would argue that before 1950, we were basically in a period of exclusivity. There are only a handful of libraries, even in the world, that could be defined as research libraries. From 1950, after the war, to 1970, we had a period of popularization, a massive growth in higher education, a massive growth in research, and therefore, a real strength in the development of our libraries. From 1970 to 1990, I call it the period of discord. It's when technology entered our world and we weren't sure quite what to do with it and how to handle it. We had serious economic challenges during that period. But we got through it. In 1990 to 2010, I call it the period of decadence, when we were able to bring large quantities of digital materials to our users, e-journal collections, e-book collections. We generally had healthy environments. Starting in 2008, we got into some trouble. And I believe we're now in a period of polygamy, looking for every partner we can to match up with. It won't work. They're too thin, they're too shallow. We need to move into the new period, which I'm calling the period of parabiosis. No one in this new room knows what the word parabiosis means. It's a biological term. Think of Siamese twins who share body parts, who share organs, who share body systems. We need our libraries to come together and not just stand side by side, but flow together in new ways. And we will then reach, after 2030, the period which I call the period of particularism, where we have distinctive capabilities in each of our libraries that support the national library needs. We are complementary and we support and collaborate in much more effective and rigorous ways. So those are my 5 commandments that I bring to you from Moses. And I hope that they will stimulate your thinking about the future of libraries in Ireland. Thank you.
Pretty high authority there, Jim. Thank you. On to Wendy next. We're moving down the table, as you can see.
Thanks. I'm Wendy White, and I'm Associate Director for Research at the University of Southampton, and I'm wondering how I follow Moses, but I'll give it a go. What I would like us to do is to imagine what the library will look like in 10 years' time. And I'm going to suggest a couple of strands. One is I'm going to suggest there will be no front-facing customer services staff at all. They will have been replaced by virtual chat services, which will learn by building up rapidly FAQ through learning conversation patterns than we would ever remember ourselves. Who works in a busy library? Somebody comes in the morning, the same person comes in the afternoon. Do you remember them in amongst all of those people? No, you don't. This chatbot will, because they will have remembered everything about that person and stored it. We will have robots, so any orientation in the library can be done by a mobile robot showing people to places. People won't be needed for that function. There will be journey tracking, both electronic and physical, so that you will seamlessly have a journey through the electronic space, and there will be completely integrated identity management so that you are known everywhere you go, unless, and we hope, there are some privacy settings which mean that you can be unknown if you want to, but that's an issue for debate. There will be fewer collection staff. Why will there be fewer collection staff? There will still be print. Even I think in 10 years' time there will still be print in this world. But what there will be is a fully automated, integrated supply chain management from production through to delivery to the end user at their point of choosing. It could even be their home. It will be like a pizza delivery. We will still have stores. We saw some examples yesterday of automated retrieval from store. But it will bypass individual institutions. We will have no need for these in individual institutions. They will be vast aggregated warehouses, think Amazon. We will have anything that can be digitized on demand. If we're feeling brave, we might say that with the advent of Sci-Hub, copy might have broken down completely in 10 years' time. The ability to keep hold of copyright and keep hold of that, a bit like taping from the radio in the 1970s with your cassette. Anyone remember that? Anyone old enough to remember that? It broke down because nobody could, in the end, get that to work. Maybe that will happen to copyright. Maybe it won't. But anything could be digitized on demand in 10 years' time. So is this true? How many people in the audience think that nothing I have said will come to pass? How many people think everything that I have said will come to pass? How many people think it's somewhere in the middle and you're all sitting on the fence? Show of hands. Very good. Excellent. So we're already agreeing as a room that the world will really be quite technologically different in 10 years' time. What will that mean for us? I've painted a rather bleak picture of lots of roles going. What will we be doing? So positively, here's 3 ideas. In order to be ready for the development of artificial intelligence, the data needs to be good. How often have we heard that as libraries? You need clean data, garbage in, garbage out. When it comes to curating, preserving, developing ways of working with data, we've already got a good platform there on which to build as librarians. We should be in that space. Ethics, we're very good at libraries about knowing our users' experience with our UX work, the number of people we engage with as libraries. When it comes to the ethical debate of AI and the development of algorithms, we should be in that space. The development of an algorithm is a cultural activity. We are good at cultural engagement. Let's be there. And thirdly, I think there's going to be a strong role for us in terms of technologically enhanced learning so that there will be more personalized learning. AI will give us the capacity for a more personalized experience, but we can be part of that development. I don't think it's going to replace learning. I think there will be a person-technology added value bonding that takes place in that educational space. You can already see it happening in medicine with kind of virtual reality examples where you're working in a creative and immersive environment where the people, social element and the technology are coming together to add value. Again, I think there's a role for libraries in that space. So that's just a challenge for us to say things will be different, but yes, we can be there. And maybe a warning shot that if we're not prepared to be there, we really might not be there at all.
Thank you very much, Wendy. just to note that we're now moving into the area of preparing staff for change, new competencies, and Leo has taken that one next, I think.
Thank you, John. Afternoon, everybody. I'm Leo Appleton. I'm Director of Library Services at Goldsmiths at the University of London. And as John said, I've been asked to talk about preparing staff for change through new skills and competencies. So over the last couple of days, we've heard a lot about the changing environment and the disruption that it causes. And just to sum up, for me, the drivers of that changing environment are fivefold. Firstly, there's technological and digital developments. I think that's fairly plain to see. There's a significant increased focus on research, and institutions that weren't research intensive are becoming so, or being encouraged to become so, and those that are increasing their research outputs. There's an increased focus on student experience, and under that we can everything that we call service fits into the kind of increase in the student experience focus. Scholarly communications has become a huge driver for change in the HE and library environment, and we've heard a lot about learning spaces and the demand for developed learning spaces. So what does this actually mean for the library and information profession, and indeed the academic librarian profession and the roles within it? Well, traditionally, we've brought a sense of order to the knowledge and information required for academic practice. And we've made that knowledge and information accessible and discoverable so that scholarship can take place. And I saw a great tweet earlier today, just simply putting what we do as a profession is we connect people with information. And what I would say, to be a little bit provocative, is that with regard to our roles and our responsibility, nothing has really changed. The demands that are now put upon us as academic librarians are just variations on that theme, but they do require us to go deeper with regards to our skill set and how we develop our skill set. But ultimately, we still and always have done connect people with information within our institutions. And it might well be that in this day and age, that information has changed, the format of that information, that knowledge has changed. It might be digital, it might be born digital, it more often is. It might be open access, it might be available on social media. That information actually might be somewhere in the research data that you're managing. That information may need copyright clearance. So there are a whole new set of skills that we need, but ultimately we still connect people with information. So some of the things that we now talk about as part of our changing roles and responsibilities is the digital content, delivering digital content, digitisation, research data management, publishing models, customer service excellence, marketing, publicity, promotion, bibliometrics, altmetrics, UX, evidence-based practice. The list continues, but they're still connecting people with information. And we need to develop deeper rather than broader skill sets. So all areas that we need to develop and all competencies that we need to develop, but they're still keeping us in that traditional role. So I still profess that nothing has really changed. The role of the library has not changed. And that might be one of our downfalls, because the perception of those above us and those beyond us, we've heard about how academic libraries are perceived by strategic leaders of institutions. They still think of us as the traditional. And what we haven't done is convey that what we're doing is far deeper than that traditional library information role, but we're still connecting people with information. So the other area of skills development, whilst we still need to develop our skills to fit that diverse range of roles and the changes that brings with it, the other key area is leadership skills and leadership development. And by that, again, we've heard a lot about leadership for everyone, not just leadership for those that lead teams and lead organisations. Those that do lead teams and can influence people absolutely need to be able to motivate, enthuse and empower staff so that they can talk about their deeper skills, so that they can do that advocacy about their deeper skills, really get across what they can bring to the table. So the onus, though, is not just on people who lead teams and lead people, but it's on all people who lead things, lead resources, lead projects, lead programs. So as a leader, or as leaders, we all need to be able to motivate and empower, and they're key skills. All professionals need to willingly adapt and go deeper, pick up and acquire and develop deeper skills, and be bold about them, reinvent themselves, consider and look after their professional identities. And we all need to improve our negotiation, advocacy, and subsequently sphere of influences within the institutions that we work in.
Splendid. Thank you, Leo. Vivian next.
So just from the very beginning, I think we need to acknowledge that transformation is hard, and it's almost unnatural. Remember your science classes back in public school where you learned that inertia is the natural state of matter. And matter resists change both in terms of speed and direction. And that sounds like a lot of meetings that I've been in the last couple of years, but I think it's something we should focus on. Sometimes, I believe in our organizations, inertia is displayed as complacency. You might occasionally hear colleagues say, no need to explore some new service or technology because the old one is perfectly adequate. And I would caution you, when you hear that term, perfectly adequate, you should quake in fear. It's not bad intentioned, but it suggests a focus on administrative efficiencies rather than our users' needs. And that's the old one foot dragging behind the cart that I mentioned earlier today. I believe we need to develop a mindset of curiosity to mitigate this reticence. And I know that you can't train someone to be curious. Curiosity, there's no PhD in curiosity. It's not a skill, it's not a competency, it's a mindset. But we can exercise the muscles around deliberate listening, around deep reflection, and forming really good questions. But at the end of the day, developing a robust professional development agenda is absolutely critical. And Jim talked about Moses. I'm going to talk about the next best thing. I'm going to talk about Wayne Gretzky, who famously said, "I skate to where the puck is going, not to where it's been." So most of us don't have the intuitive sense of where the puck is going. We're not all Canadian hockey stars. But we can keep our head up. And we can train every day, and we can look around, and we can be attentive so that when we see radical collaborations going on, we'll recognize them. And when opportunities arise for disruptive national initiatives, the ones that Jim was talking about, we'll recognize them, and we'll be prepared to advocate for them. And we'll be better prepared to choose the futures that make sense for us, whether they're robots or not. So in my work with IFLA, I have met library workers from around the world, and I have heard inspiring stories. I have heard from library workers with little to no financial support, spending money, their own personal funds, to get to international conferences because there was no funds to draw upon. And it's made me realize that professional development is not a perk. Professional development is not an entitlement that's written into our employment contracts. Professional development is a personal responsibility. It's a responsibility that we hold to ourselves and to our organizations. But I'll also warn you that professional development is hard when it's done well. Simply going to a conference isn't hard, but really being fully present, constantly reflecting on what you're hearing and identifying the big takeaways for your organization is challenging intellectual work. I'll say it again, submitting the 20-page transcript of everything you heard at this conference is not helpful. Synthesizing what you've learned over the last 2 days into a brief, action-oriented report is hard, but your director will appreciate it. Lastly, we've heard many references during the last 2 days about confidence, and so I feel it fitting to close with this theme. I believe that we as a profession are humble, but we are not timid. We deliver service, but we are not servile. It is a profession that I'm extremely proud of, and I believe that the concept of raising all boats really figures here. It's a small world, and when Ireland's libraries succeed, the entire global library community succeeds. So that's all I've got to say.
That's wonderful. Thanks very much, Vivian, and to all our panelists. And you said lots of great things, and you kept a good time too. So thank you. That gives us 25 minutes we have for your participation, which is a really vital element of this session. There's a microphone doing the rounds. Is anybody ready to ask a question after all those provocations? All you've got to do is put your hand up so we can get the microphone to you. Excellent. Up at the very front, Helen has a question, but can somebody get the microphone to Helen, please?
Thank you so much. Those were fabulous. When I joined Trinity, The exam question was to raise the library to the next level for 21st century. That was the exam question. So I went on a massive consultation, and there were lots. The most provocative question came from the president, the provost, who said, how does the library catalyse research? He didn't want services. How does the library catalyse research? And I've also heard it from the Chancellor of Oxford University. I don't want a service. I want you to be absolutely catalysing, not partnering, catalysing research. So we've done a little bit of that. Zinged actually with computer scientists, where we are looking at the whole of the library as not just big data, though they were setting up some sandboxes of our metadata, but library as big content. You know, if content is king, then we're chock-a-block full of that. Doing virtual reality with fabulous creative technologists for our visitors, our million visitors to the long room. We've got a virtual reality of the long room with an actor as Jonathan Swift talking in front of his bust. I mean, we're just trying things out. But those are just toes in the water. So my question to the panel is, how do you really, really, really catalyse research? Please.
Good question. Anyone like to take the lead on that?
I guess I can jump in very briefly, although I'm stepping over the professional development to go into my colleagues section, so they can do the same. One area that we at McMaster have found very successful was moving into the area of digital scholarship. So we have a research center that reports directly to the VPR, in addition to the University Librarian and the Dean of Humanities, that creates a space where faculty and graduate students can learn the basics of digital scholarship. They can come in, they can learn about data visualization, they can learn about textual analysis. And the fact that it is co-led by a faculty member and a lead from the library has really set the stage for us. And I think it's been quite a tremendous deliverable. The other piece that we've found great success is supporting the infrastructure around research. And we've done that by building a Vivo installation, which showcases the work of the researchers for the world to see, using a data feed coming in from symplectics elements. So both have been very successful.
Thanks, Vivian. Anybody else? Yes, looks like Jim is ready to go.
So at Columbia, there's a number of initiatives that have engaged the faculty in new ways and I believe have had a catalytic effect on their research. One was the creation of a Center for New Media Teaching and Learning, which was not just a support center for helping faculty integrate digital resources and technology into their learning and classroom experiences, but also to study research in learning much more effectively. So we were staffing that with not only educational technologists, but with educational researchers who would partner with faculty in the various disciplines. Also created a Center for Digital Research and Scholarship, some of the same characteristics as McMaster, but also had the responsibility for being more of a virtual center, that is being in the medical offices, in the research laboratories, working directly with the scholars in the various disciplines. We also created a network of digital centers, and they were very targeted towards specific disciplines. Digital Humanities Center, a Digital Social Sciences Center, a Digital Science Center, a Digital Architecture Center, a Digital Business Center, each of those having responsibility to engage faculty in new thinking about what digital resources opened up in terms of new research questions that could be explored, and how the library was in a position to provide not just the content, but the tools and the applications and hopefully some inspiration to make some new approaches to research possible.
Thank you. Wendy? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a common theme emerging here, and I think it's around co-creation. So it's about stepping outside of we talked about it yesterday, the service sort of language, stepping right outside of that. It's not about us providing something to somebody. It is about us working together collectively to create something, whether that be the journey towards new knowledge creation, whether that be educational pathways for learning, and all research is learning. I think one of the things a lot of institutions are still asking themselves is how we can bring that learning and research together in a virtuous cycle. It's not one or the other. For me, it's not a question just about research. It's about the whole enterprise of the institution together, of which research is one part of that, and the same applies to all.
Very good.
If I might, John, I'll just throw in the voice of a non-research intensive institution where actually the being in a position to catalyse research may be 10, 20 years ahead. I still think in a kind of ever-increasing research-intensive environment, the library, even in its infancy, still has a role to play in that partnership working, in seeking out research, encouraging research, engaging researchers in the library, using collections to generate research, using the library space to bring researchers together. So we'd be at different levels of maturity on the whole, being able to catalyse research, but I think there's something to do for everybody, because I think it's imperative in this new order.
Thanks, Leo. Great question, Helen, to get us going as well. So I hope we covered some of the issues you raised. We're ready for another question. Yes, well down the back there.
Hi everyone, Alan Carberry from UCC Library. It just struck me as I was listening to the conference theme, disruptive transformation, that while that might have a negative connotation, I think the overall conversation over the last couple of days has been quite positive, and that we're really well placed. As long as we follow the Moses commandments, we're in a pretty good place to tackle these elements of change or elements of transformation. But I'm just curious if there are any elements of transformation or any issues on the horizon that the panelists feel we're not ready for or are not our business, and what they might be.
Great question, Alan. So anybody take that one on? Areas we're not ready for?
I think we're ready for everything, are we not? Yes.
Future is positive.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is, as I've suggested in my talk yesterday and in my remarks today, is we need to stop moving independently, institutionally down the same paths. We simply do not have the resources and the capacity to do that well. And therefore, we need to find ways to co-invest and build things together from the start, so that they have much more rigor, much more depth, and that we have the collective wisdom and the collective capacity of multiple institutions to make it happen. I believe it also, we're not going to get massive amounts of new resources. I also understand, I want you to shake your heads no if I'm wrong, that there's not a tradition or a structure of massive resource development fundraising in Irish academic libraries. Yes?
Correct.
There is. I'm correct. Oh, correct.
Correct.
And therefore, I think that takes years of development. And so I think what you have is the ability to work together and to stop doing the same things over and over again. Generally, that means one person in each library is doing it. But if you have, I don't know how many libraries here, but if you have those 80 people who are doing the same thing at 80 different libraries, finding a new way to work together, what resources could be unleashed to focus on these other areas of importance that we've identified over the course of these 2 days? Institutional barriers, institutional egos, personal careers get in the way. And those are some of the negative components that we need to sort of push back against and find ways to enable everyone to be successful in this type of environment.
Mindset could be as big an issue as skills, perhaps.
Yeah.
But Vivian, you looked ready to say something there?
The one thing I was going to say was that I believe that Ireland, like Canada, has a certain advantage, and that's in terms of the number of players at the table.
Yes.
So Canada has 29 major research institutions, and we sometimes joke that we do everything together. Everything is built together. We collaborate constantly, and it makes it easier for us to rationalize resources. Whereas in some other parts of the world where there are just more players, it makes it much more difficult. So I'm hoping that you'll consider this a bit of a strength that you can play on.
Yeah. Yeah. If we could move on to another question, if there's nothing further from up here. Yes, very good, Monica. We get a microphone here.
First of all, just, yes, we do consider it a strength. Well, I certainly do, collaboration. But going back to what Jim said, it strikes me that for us to transform, I was thinking the whole way through, but we just don't have the resources to be doing transformative stuff and still doing the day job. It just becomes more and more difficult. So what I'd like to ask the panel is, to me, the challenge is identifying what we can stop doing and being brave enough to stop doing it, because there will still be some of our users and our academics who still expect us to always do that traditional service we always did, whereas we know that if we stop doing that, we could do something really, really cool for you over here. So any advice or thoughts on that, please?
Excellent question, Monica. That's a good challenge. Wendy, you look like you'd like to comment.
Yes, I think what we need to do is put forward a more compelling vision than we perhaps do currently, because people with influence, people with the resources are going to be shy of letting us have a go if we're not very clear about what it is we can do if we stop doing some other things. So for me, the single most important thing we can do is be much bolder within, not just within our institutions, but collectively put forward the collaborative vision that we have, put it on the table, and then, do that soft networking side of things in terms of garnering the support that we're going to need in order to deliver it. So for me, it's the vision first.
I think with regards to stopping doing things, I think that's we have to internalise that. I think that's very much our problem. I think we as a profession do things because it's traditional and it's what we've always done, whereas we know we can add more value if we did stop doing things. So it's a battle we have to have with ourselves. It's not really a battle with the institution, because as long as we're still delivering what we're responsible for, which I'll say again, it's connecting our academics and our students with the information that they need. As long as we're still fulfilling that, it doesn't matter what we're doing in the background. So I think we have to look at our own processes and procedures and get it right from there so that we can add more value.
I can give you a concrete example from my own institution when we walked away from copy cataloging. Is that term used here? And that was a disruptive thing to do. And yet, I think we realized years later it was the right thing to do. And so it dramatically changed the work that was being done within my institution and allowed us to divert talented staff to other areas where their talents were better used. Another area where we made a dramatic change that might have felt disruptive at the time was removing our librarians from our reference desks and co-locating service points. So all of a sudden, librarians had time to work on new areas of the enterprise that we had not even imagined before. And it was disruptive at the time, but if you went back and asked each one of them 8 or 9 years later, would you like to go back onto the reference desk? Not a single person would say yes. But it felt hard at the time.
Yeah, very good examples. Thank you. Yeah, will we move on to another area? Anybody like to put their hand up? Yes, the microphone right behind you, Marta.
Hi. You all talk about the need for collaboration, and I completely agree, and collaboration between the libraries, but also collaboration between the library and other areas of our institutions and beyond our institutions. But as we all know, there are always administrative and institutional barriers that are actually stopping us from doing that. So my question is, what do libraries need to do to start targeting those problems and fixing them so that you can actually collaborate effectively?
Thank you, Marta. Yeah, Lucy, somebody who's got the wider institutional perspective, could I maybe ask you to consider that?
Okay, well, I'd be disappointed to hear that there are significant barriers, because I think we all need, whether in the academia or whether we're in your libraries, we all have significant challenges in third level education. And to get through those challenges, we all need to work together. And there's certainly expertise in libraries and that we don't have in the rest of the university. So I suppose from my own point of view, moving to graduate studies, which was a new role for me within the university, I would never underestimate the value of relationships across the university and investing in those. I think that's something that is really important. In Galway, I know that the library have put together a library strategy group, which not only contains the library management, but other people from across the university. So we're already have a regular session where we're together thinking about what the strategy for the library should be. I think another thing that I think helps is having champions outside your own walls that know what you're doing and see the value, even if it's not directly applicable to loads of other people, but even really good examples of how either joint research projects or something like that can, and to spread the word on that. They're my first thoughts anyway, John.
Very good. Thanks, Lucy. Anybody else care to add to that?
Yeah, I think one of the more powerful early stage arenas for multi-institutional collaboration, particularly among libraries, is bilateral and trilateral partnerships. Institutions of comparable size and comparable vision, comparable capacity, coming together. And my experience is to engage the people at the university who can help break through those barriers. The person who is the institutional lawyer, the corporate counsel, the person who is head of HR, because there will be lots of HR issues, the person who runs technology, because you want to be able to open up access to information across institutions, which sometimes can be very difficult given the firewalls that we built in our institutions. So I think if there's a commitment among a group of institutions to work together, a group of libraries, they should engage the right people at the university early in that process to identify those barriers and to work through those barriers. I think there's also remarkable opportunities for libraries to work much more aggressively with museums and archives. I don't know to what extent there is a LAM-type initiative in Ireland, but that, I think, is also a great opportunity to find ways to do different things together, and I would encourage you to find those opportunities. The harder one is the public-private partnerships. Working with the corporate sector, with the publisher community. I've seen some significant R&D work take place in that space. I've also seen some collaborative projects move forward successfully with business providing the funding. I think of Google Books as an example, with all the challenges and problems there were bundled up in that. It got lots and lots of books digitized, which are now searchable and open to the world. So I think there are opportunities to engage your corporate community as well in those types of conversations and partnerships. But the barriers should be dealt with up front, not when you get too far down the road and you have to unbundle what you think you've accomplished.
Thanks, Jim. Vivian?
The other piece I would add is the word evidence. We need to bring evidence to the table when we are exploring radical partnerships. And we also need to bring an understanding of what the drivers are for our particular senior leadership team at the university. And many of us work with a revolving door of provosts and chancellors, and they all have different drivers. For some of them, it's teaching and learning, and so you can make a compelling message around improving the learning experience for students. And then that next provost may be not interested in that. They're focused on research, so you've got to be nimble and quick on your feet and ready to identify the kinds of triggers that will make the most sense and be most compelling to the leadership that you're trying to speak to, knowing that they could potentially change over time. But I think evidence is critical.
Thanks, Vivian. Yes, did you want, Wendy, please?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think a lot of this is also about that long-term build-up of partnerships. You can get something to go where you don't really know each other beforehand, but it's much better if you're actually incrementally building a long-term relationship where you're understanding each other's needs and drivers, and it's a long game. So I think we need to not be afraid of that and plan accordingly and say if we're successful in this enterprise in 10 years' time rather than 6 months, that's okay, and take that long view.
I wanted to cite an article for you. I can't remember the title of the article, but I can give you the author and the date and the publication. It's published by Rosa Beth Cantor, Kantor. It was published in 1995 in Harvard Business Review. And I still use it in presentations a lot, where she outlines the necessary characteristics to make a collaboration and partnership work between and among institutions. I think you would find it to be an eye-opening article and very helpful in thinking in fresh ways. Even though it's 20 years, over 20 years old, it's still, I think, very appropriate. I wanted to cite one example, a very small example of a collaboration that worked. At Columbia, we have one of the, I think, only full-time Tibetan study librarians in North America. And there are several institutions that have faculty and students who work in Tibetan area. And one of them contacted us, the University of Toronto. So we're actually able to build a cross-border partnership saying we can't hire a person with that, but we would be willing to contract with you to buy a certain percentage of the time of your Tibetan Studies librarian, who now develops the collections at both institutions, does virtual reference with their graduate students and faculty, and each year does a buying trip to Tibet and China and northern India to acquire materials for both institutions. So it's a really, and we have many examples of that type of role that we've taken on for other institutions, particularly in area studies librarianship.
Thanks, Jim. Oh, yes, Leo. Yeah.
Just a final word, and just picking up on Jim's points about actually just within your own institutions needing to collaborate with your legal services people, with HR, certainly with your IT structure, IT infrastructure. If that's the size and the extent of the collaboration, they're probably the micro internal collaborations we need to be working on in the first instance. But the other thing I would take away from this is actually collaborate where you can, because if there's an appetite and the spirit of collaboration, even just in maybe a staff development initiative across 2 or 3 institutions, go for it. There'll be less barriers there than, say, a big infrastructural type of collaboration.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Leo. It would literally be the last orders. It would have to be a question with short answers, should we say, rather than a short question. Is there anything out there? Because yes, was that at the front? No? Somebody with their hand up? Yeah, sure. Yeah, we just got just got pretty short if we could, please. We're a bit tight now.
It's just occurring to me, and maybe I'm just trying to articulate it in my own head. Are we very much just using a very broad sweep of a brush here in terms of what we're talking about in the future? Are we taking into account the heterogeneity of our users? I mean, I'm just thinking from a personal experience, we talk about students, but there are so many different types of students. There's the older scholars who are resistant to change, not resistant to change, resistant to technology. And I know they'll probably be dying out eventually. It's a bit like, I'm just thinking of my own mother, and she used to have major problems with the telephone when she'd ring up a service and get this thing telling her what to do and press 1, 2, 3, and why can't I talk to a person? I'm just thinking about factoring in the human element, and we talk about it in a disparate way, dealing with particular groups, but are sometimes we just too bland and too general how we talk about our users going forward? Do we need to take account into these things going forward, different needs?
Maybe if there's one person, it looks like it's Jim.
I think one of our failures with our open access strategy has been our failure to understand the diversity in the disciplines and how they look at and understand these issues of open research and open access to information as through the lens of the way they do their research and the type of resources they need. And so people who are more monograph dependent have a very different approach and attitude towards this than those that are research data dependent versus research journal dependent. I think that same principle applies in the learning community, where we have a whole diversity of types ranging from high school students who are taking classes up through continuing education students who are senior citizens and continuous learning. So there's a broad diversity that we need to reflect in all of our work. I agree with you.
Thank you, Jim. And we have run out of time, so I'm sorry nobody else is trying to come. It was a good question. Thank you very much. And in the 30 seconds left, I would like to say some big thank you. I've given myself 30 seconds here, but I'd like to say some thank yous. First and foremost to our panelists, Lucy, Jim, Wendy, Leo, and Vivian, and also for their expertise and stimulation To Catherine Smith, who's been exemplary. I love your can-do approach, Catherine. You made it easy for us. You were typical of the organising committee at this conference, and thank you so much. Sandra Collins for her tips on chairing, which I tried to follow, but all of you for your participation. But we could finish with a huge thanks to our panel, please. We've been asked to stay here. We just stay seated to the left. Stay.